What do you think, when do we start seeing the $2 trillion that was put into the market start flooding into the economy? Or maybe it already is by the $1,200 checks that people are getting, but that's only a fraction of it.
Yeah, we've had a very consumer-driven economy for quite some time. And the things that I would read were saying and portending bad futures based on the fact that companies weren't investing. And so, the corporate spend and the reinvestment and the durable goods and, that was low in terms of where, what makes up GDP. And of course, government spending and consumer spending were what were driving the growth that we were getting quarter over quarter. I think the effort with the $2 trillion, the CARES Act activity is to keep the consumer aspect strong and keep purchasing up. Although I can tell you in my own experience, my wife and I aren't purchasing as much in the last 45 to 60 days as we were in the period of time before that. So I think there's that's the intention, is to inject stimulus money and additional unemployment insurance money and these payroll protection loans to help people keep people employed, to help organizations keep people employed. And I do believe that's working. I mean, in my own experience, I know of a number of organizations that have decided, rather than reducing compensation or laying employees off, they've taken this payroll protection program loan, and at least for the 8-week period after their loan, they have resources to keep their businesses, fully staffed and keep their fingers fully crossed that at the end of that 8-week period, they're going to be able to get their business cranking again and produce the revenues they want to produce in order to make profits.
I was in a message group and there was somebody complaining about how wasteful they saw people spending that $1,200, right? They were saying like, well, that's just, they're out there blowing it. And it was like, that's exactly why they gave it to consumers and not companies, because companies would have said, let's hold back and see what the future is. And what you wanted to see was that money continue to keep the credit cards paid, the rent paid, and people spending so the economy can keep moving.
It's very interesting, but if you don't have a political bias and you just sit back and look at the CARES Act, it was pretty ingeniously developed over a really short period of time. So I do commend the people that were in the room and I don't know if it was 6 or 56 that hammered out the right outcome, but there was stimulus money sent directly to consumers, the $1,200 per person, $600 per child check. There was unemployment insurance protection so that if you did get laid off, you had, more money coming in supplemented by the federal government. And then there was money injected directly into corporations and organizations by the payroll protection plan loans and other credit and stimulus activity with corporations. So there's a little something for everybody. And I do think that the intention was people do need to keep paying their rent. People do need to keep paying their regular car loan bills and their insurance and healthcare and premiums and all those things. So if we can keep that going until we get our hands around the pandemic, then we have a better chance of fewer people suffering. And I think that's going to be the outcome. You're like thumbs up. This was the right way to do it. You're calling it ingenious. Yeah, I think time will tell, right? If Sweden's approach is more sensible than what the United States did, where they weren't as intense on sort of locking people down. But ultimately, whatever we did, to prevent as much as 2 million people from perishing from this virus, I think, you got to look back and say it was worth it if that's indeed what the result was. I don't know how long we're going to be dealing with the effects of the virus or the effects of trying to suppress the virus. I mean, both of there's still a lot of uncertainty around both.
My impression is $2 trillion is on par with whatever kind of spending we were doing during World War II to be able to get ready for building battleships and things like that. And you could say, there is no coming back from that. You've made a trajectory change, and you'll never see the end of the way that impacted the world, for better or for worse, right? You just sent us on a different path.
That's definitely, I think, a realistic approach, that what we invested in America in World War II in the way of spending on today's dollars, I think people would argue it was worth it. We're speaking English today and not German or Japanese. So, yeah, it was worth it. The other way to sort of look at the 2 trillion is our gross national product on an annual basis is 20 trillion. I don't know the exact number, but
that sounds about right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So 2 trillion is like 10%, which is a little bit more than 5 weeks, 6 weeks of total spending by everybody in the economy. So if the federal government ordinarily spends X, and now they're spending X plus 2 trillion, and the business and consumers spend Y, and now they're spending Y minus 1.8 trillion, theoretically, we would be better off as a GDP. We would have more GDP than we would have had this not happened, because... But
then why not just do a $2 trillion injection in November of 2019? Like, if the economy can work where you can just punch up a bunch of money, why not do it all the time?
I think because the answer is the economy doesn't work if the federal government punches in $2 trillion every 6 months. I think ultimately it does create pressures in the economy that you don't want, whether it's inflation, whether it's credit deterioration. If the federal government, and there are some people that think, oh my God, the federal government is borrowing 2 trillion and they can't even pay back the 20 some trillion that's already on the books. And that's legitimate. I mean, there are people who are really concerned that we're already way over our skis with, government spending money they don't have. But if you look at the possibility of repeating this on a regular basis, then you end up in a situation where at some point people say, I'm just not going to borrow money from the United States anymore because, they're paying me back with dollars that are worth less and less and less and less because they're just flooding their economy with money. So again, go back to that inflation, same amount of goods being produced, but now we've got twice the much money. You would expect prices would go up. So I do think it's a delicate balance that, we've had the reason right now to kind of move outside of the norms and the comfort zone in order to fight for our future as a result of this pandemic.